My parents sold my dying grandmother's antique Steinway piano behind my back. They used the $100,000 to buy my golden child sister a brand new luxury SUV. When I told my grandmother on her hospice bed, she did not cry. She simply picked up the phone and called her lawyer. 30 days later, my parents were homeless. My sister was facing criminal charges, and I was holding the deed to the mansion they had lived in for 20 years. Before I tell you how a single musical note destroyed their entire life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who finally bit back. My name is Imani, and for the last 5 years I have worked as a music therapist for autistic children in downtown Chicago. My job is to find melodies in the silence to help broken souls speak when words fail them. After a grueling 12-hour shift, the smell of hospital antiseptic seems to cling to my skin, seeping into my pores. It is a sharp chemical scent that usually makes me nauseous, but tonight all I could think about was the cure waiting for me at home. My grandmother Rose's 1965 Steinway Model B. It was not just a piano. It was the only thing in that house that ever loved me back. Driving home through the heavy rain, my fingers were already moving on the steering wheel, practicing the opening chords of a piece by Rachmaninoff. My body was exhausted, aching in every joint, but my mind was desperate for the ivory touch of those keys. That piano was my sanctuary, the one place where I was not the disappointment, not the invisible daughter, not the funding source for my sister's vanity. I pulled into the driveway, noticing the lights were off in the front room. Good, they must be out. Just me and the music. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It felt hollow. I dropped my keys on the console table and walked into the living room, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering in from the street lamps outside. I stopped. I blinked, sure that my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I took a step forward, and then another, my breath catching in my throat. The corner by the bay window, the sacred space where the Steinway had stood for 40 years, was empty. It was violently empty. The air where the mahogany curve should have been felt cold. I walked to the center of the void, my knees trembling so hard I thought they would buckle. There were 4 deep circular indentations crushed into the expensive hardwood floor, the ghosts of where the heavy brass legs had rested just this morning. Dust motes danced in the air, disturbed by the violence of its removal. I reached out a hand, touching the empty space, my fingers grasping at nothing but stale air. A sound tried to escape my lips, a scream of rage and grief, but it died in my chest, turning into a ragged, suffocating gasp. They didn't just sell an instrument, they sold my history. They sold the hours my grandmother spent teaching me scales when my mother was too busy criticizing my hair. They sold the only voice I had. I fell to my knees, tracing the scars on the floorboards, feeling a coldness spread from my stomach to my fingertips. It felt like a grave robbery. And then, through the ringing in my ears, I heard it. The sound of an engine roaring to life in the backyard, followed by the high-pitched, triumphant laughter of my sister. The laughter outside was sharp, like glass breaking. It cut through the silence of the funeral home my living room had become. I dragged my heavy limbs toward the bay window, the very window that used to frame the silhouette of the Steinway against the setting sun. Now it only framed my nightmare. I pulled back the heavy velvet curtains, and the late afternoon sun stabbed at my eyes, blinding and cruel. When my vision cleared, I saw it. The replacement. Parked right in the middle of the driveway, crushing the hydrangea bushes my grandmother had planted 50 years ago, sat a monstrosity of white metal and chrome, a brand new Mercedes G-Wagon. It was wrapped in a massive red ribbon that looked less like a gift bow and more like a fresh wound. It was ostentatious, loud, and completely soulless. Just like my sister. Bianca was draped over the hood of the car, striking a pose that I had seen 1,000 times on her social media feed. She wore a white dress that matched the car, her smile stretched wide and fake, aimed perfectly at the camera lens my brother-in-law Brad was holding. Brad was crouching low to get the perfect angle, shouting directions, like he was a visionary director instead of a mediocre real estate agent. And there, standing to the side with crystal flutes of champagne in their hands, were my parents, David and Sheila. They looked proud, not the quiet, deep pride of seeing a child achieve something meaningful, but the shallow, desperate pride of people who finally have a new toy to show off to the neighbors. My stomach turned. That car was not just a vehicle, it was the physical manifestation of a theft. Every inch of that leather interior was paid for by the keys of my piano. The engine block was cast from the bronze harp of the Steinway. They had traded 90 years of musical history, of jazz legacy, of my grandmother's sweat and tears, for a depreciating asset that would be out of style in 3 years. They had swapped a voice for an object. The irony was suffocating. My grandmother used that piano to pay for my father's college tuition, to pay for the roof over their heads, and they had just sold it to buy a status symbol for the daughter who never worked a day in her life. I watched my mother laugh, throwing her head back. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years. She never laughed like that with me. With me, it was always sighs of disappointment or critical pursing of lips. But for Bianca, for the golden child, who demanded everything and gave nothing, the champagne flowed freely. I felt a heat rising in my chest, a burning sensation that started in my gut and clawed its way up my throat. It wasn't sadness anymore. Sadness is passive. This was pure, unadulterated rage. I realized then that they didn't just sell the piano because they needed money. They sold it because they knew how much I loved it. It was a power move, a reminder of who really owned this house and who really owned me. Or so they thought. I turned away from the window, my hands balling into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I was done watching. It was time to crash the party. I slammed the back door shut, the sound barely registering over the bass of the music blasting from the portable speakers. The humid air of the garage hit me, smelling of exhaust fumes and expensive cologne. My father, David, turned toward me. He did not ask how my day was. He did not notice the shaking of my hands or the pale shock on my face. He just extended his arm, holding out his latest iPhone like I was the hired help. Imani, perfect timing. He boomed, his voice projecting that practiced charisma he used to swindle investors. Here, take this. We need a shot for Bianca's Instagram. Make sure you get the red bow and the emblem in the frame. Get down low so the car looks bigger. I did not move. I did not reach for the phone. I just stared at the man who had supposedly raised me, looking for a shred of guilt in his eyes. There was none. Only impatience. Take the phone, Imani. He snapped, his smile faltering slightly. Your sister is waiting. Where is it? My voice was low, dangerous. It was a tone I had never used with him before. He blinked, confused by my defiance. Where is what? Grandma Rose's Steinway. I said louder this time, my voice cutting through the music. The one that was sitting in the living room this morning. The one she specifically left to me in her instructions. Where is my piano, David? I didn't call him Dad. The disrespect made his jaw tighten. But before he could explode, my mother, Sheila, floated over. She placed a manicured hand on my father's shoulder, her eyes cold and hard. Lower your voice, Imani. The neighbors are watching. She took a sip of her champagne, looking bored, as if we were discussing the weather and not a grand larceny. We simply did some decluttering. That monstrosity was taking up half the living room. It was gathering dust and making the house look like a mausoleum. Decluttering, I choked out, feeling the blood pounding in my ears. That piano was a masterpiece. It was worth more than everything else in this house combined. My mother rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive it felt like a slap. Value is subjective, darling. And right now, what has value is appearance. Do you know how embarrassing it was for your sister to drive that 3-year-old sedan to meet high-profile clients? Bianca is closing deals. She is building a future. She needs a vehicle that screams success, not some dusty relic used for whatever hobby it is you do with those sick children. I looked from my mother to the gleaming white car. The transaction was clear. They had literally traded my soul to polish my sister's ego. My mother stepped closer, her perfume overpowering the smell of gasoline. "Be happy for your sister for once," she hissed. "We got 100 grand for that old wood. It covered the down payment and the first year of payments. It is finally being useful. Now stop making a scene and take the picture or go back inside. We do not need your negative energy out here." Brad peeled himself away from the shiny white metal of the car and sauntered over to me. The smell of cheap beer and expensive cologne hit me before he did. Without asking, he draped a heavy, sweaty arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a side hug that felt more like a chokehold. I stiffened, my skin crawling at the contact, but I did not pull away. Not yet. I wanted to hear exactly how he justified this crime. "Look, Imani," he said, his voice dropping to that condescending tone men use when they think they are explaining rocket science to a toddler. "I know you are sentimental about that old thing, but let us be real. It was just a heavy piece of furniture taking up prime real estate. The wood was practically rotting. The keys were yellow. It was a dinosaur." I stared straight ahead, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Rotting. He called a perfectly maintained, climate-controlled Steinway rotting. "You have no idea how hard I had to hustle to move that thing." Brad continued squeezing my shoulder as if we were co-conspirators. "I had to call in every favor I had. Most guys took one look at it and laughed. They said it would cost more to haul it away than it was worth. But you know me, I do not take no for an answer. I found a guy, a friend of a friend, who was willing to take it off our hands for parts. I managed to squeeze a clean 100,000 out of him." He paused, waiting for me to thank him. When I remained silent, he gave a short, arrogant laugh. "You should be thanking me, really. I turned a pile of junk into a luxury SUV for your sister. That is what I do. I create value where there is none. I saved this family the embarrassment of having that dusty coffin in the living room. Now Bianca has a car that matches her status, and Mom and Dad have their space back. Everyone wins." I looked down at his hand on my shoulder. His fingers were thick, pressing into my collarbone. I imagined grabbing his wrist and twisting it until it snapped. I imagined telling him right then that the rotting wood he sold for scraps was worth $250,000. But I swallowed the rage. It tasted like bile. If he thought he was the savior of this family, I was going to let him believe it. Because the higher he climbed on his pedestal of lies, the harder he would fall when I kicked it out from under him. I finally shrugged his arm off my shoulder, stepping back just enough to look him in the eye. "You really think you did us a favor, do not you, Brad?" He smirked, raising his glass in a mock toast. "I do not think, Imani." "I know. Now come on. Stop being a buzzkill and get in the picture. The lighting is perfect." Before I could answer Brad, a blinding light flashed in my face. Bianca had turned on the ring light attached to her phone case and shoved the camera inches from my nose. She did not ask for permission. She never did. To her, I was just a prop in the reality show starring herself. "Hey guys, look who finally decided to show up from her little hospital job," Bianca chirped, her voice pitching up an octave into that fake sugary influencer tone that made my skin crawl. "This is my baby sister Imani. She is a little camera shy and honestly kind of a Grinch today, but deep down she is super happy for me." "Right, Imani. Say hi to the followers." She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my bicep, trying to force me into the frame next to the red bow. On her screen, I saw my own face filtered and distorted to look smoother, happier. It was a lie. Everything about this moment was a lie. The car, the happiness, the sisterly bond. It was all manufactured for likes, while my heart was bleeding out on the garage floor. I did not fake a smile. I did not wave. I jerked my arm away from her grip with enough force that her phone almost clattered to the concrete. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice cold and flat. "And do not put me on your live stream." Bianca gasped, a theatrical sound for her audience, but she quickly tapped the screen to end the broadcast. "Thanks, guys. Gotta run. Love you," she said quickly before the screen went black. The moment the phone was lowered, the bubbly, sweet sister vanished. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated ugly. She stepped into my personal space, looming over me in her high heels. "You are such a brat," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You just could not let me have one moment, could you? You always have to make everything about your tragic little life." "You sold my piano, Bianca," I said, my voice shaking. "You sold the one thing Grandma Rose left specifically for me. You stole it." "Oh, grow up," she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Stole is such a harsh word. We liquidated an asset. And let us be honest, Imani. You were never going to do anything with it. You play for sick kids in a hospital basement. You do not make money. You do not bring prestige to this family. That piano was sitting there gathering dust, just like your potential." She gestured wildly to the massive white SUV behind her. "This car is an investment. I am in sales. I need to look the part. Clients trust success. They do not trust people who drive beat-up Hondas. This vehicle is going to help me close deals that will bring actual money into this house. Something you would not understand with your charity work." She poked a finger hard into my chest. "Grandma left that piano to you, sure. But Mom and Dad pay the mortgage on the house it was sitting in. Think of it as back rent. You have been mooching off their space for years. We just finally collected what was owed, so stop acting like a victim. You are just jealous because for once the spotlight is on me and you cannot stand it." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the delusion in her eyes. She truly believed she was the victim here. She believed her image was worth more than my heritage. She thought she had won. But she had no idea that by invoking the mortgage and the house, she had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy her. I did not argue. I did not scream. I just stared at her until she looked away, uncomfortable with the silence. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and broken only by the hum of the cicadas in the late afternoon heat. I looked at Bianca standing there in her white dress, guarding the stolen vehicle like a dragon guarding gold. Something inside me snapped. It was a physical sensation, like a rubber band popping against my heart. I did not want to argue anymore. I wanted to hurt them the way they had hurt me. I lunged past Bianca, my hand reaching for the massive red ribbon draped across the hood of the Mercedes. I wanted to rip it off. I wanted to scratch that pristine white paint. I wanted to make them feel the loss of something beautiful. Get away from it. The shout came from my left, followed by a heavy, brutal impact. My father, a man who had never raised a hand to me in discipline growing up, slammed his shoulder into my chest. The force of it knocked the wind out of me. I stumbled back, my heels catching on the edge of the driveway, and I fell hard onto the manicured grass. The damp earth seeped into my scrubs instantly. My hip throbbed where I had hit the ground, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the sight above me. My father stood over me, his chest heaving, his face twisted in a protective snarl. But he was not protecting his child. He was protecting the car. He blocked the SUV, with his body looking at me like I was a vandal, a stray dog that had wandered onto his property. "Are you crazy?" he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You could have scratched the clear coat. Do you have any idea how much a paint correction costs on a vehicle like this?" I looked up at him, tears finally blurring my vision. "You pushed me," I whispered. "You pushed your daughter for a car." "Oh, stop being dramatic," my mother shouted from the porch, not even bothering to put down her champagne glass. "You were going to ruin the presentation. Look at you rolling around in the dirt. You are always the one ruining everything, Imani. Always the black cloud raining on our parade. Why can you not just let us be happy? Why do you always have to make us the bad guys?" I lay there for a moment, listening to the accusations rain down on me. Selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. The words were familiar. I had heard them my whole life. But today, lying in the grass while my family protected a pile of metal bought with my inheritance, the words lost their power. They did not hurt anymore. They just clarified things. They clarified that I did not have a family. I had a group of people who shared my DNA and preyed on my emotions. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed myself up. I did not brush the grass off my pants. I did not wipe the tears from my cheeks. I did not scream back. I did not beg for an apology. I simply stood there and looked at them. I looked at Bianca smirking behind her husband. I looked at Brad checking the car for scratches. I looked at my parents, their faces red with self-righteous indignation. I said nothing. I turned my back on them. I walked past the G-Wagon, past the red ribbon, and walked straight to my beat-up Honda Civic parked on the street. "Where do you think you are going?" My mother called out, her voice rising in panic as she realized I was not engaging in the usual fight. "We are cutting the cake soon. Imani, come back here." I got into my car and locked the door. I started the engine, the vibration of the steering wheel grounding me. I adjusted the rearview mirror. In the glass, I saw them standing there, small and distorted figures in the distance. My eyes in the reflection were dry now. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp determination. I shifted the car into drive. I had one stop to make, one phone call to make, and then the war would begin. I pressed the gas pedal and didn't look back. The streetlights blurred into long streaks of amber and white as I merged onto the highway. The city of Chicago was alive around me, pulsing with a rhythm that usually comforted me, but tonight, the only rhythm I could feel was the frantic beating of my own heart. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I was driving away from the house I grew up in, but my mind was traveling back in time. Back to a history my parents had conveniently chosen to forget. To David and Sheila, that Steinway Model B was just a piece of furniture. It was heavy, it was old, it gathered dust. To them, it was just wood and ivory and wire that could be exchanged for currency. They saw a price tag where they should have seen a soul. They did not understand that they had not just sold a piano. They had sold a witness. That instrument was built in 1965. It did not come from a store. It came from a studio in Detroit. My grandmother Rose was not just some church choir singer. In her prime, her voice could melt iron. She sang backup for the legends. The story she told me, the one she whispered to me while teaching me middle C, was that Aretha Franklin herself had played that piano. After a recording session that lasted until 4 in the morning, the Queen of Soul had looked at my grandmother and said that an instrument with that much heart belonged to a woman with that much fire. She had it sent to my grandmother's apartment the next day. For 50 years, that piano held the secrets of our family. It had survived the riots of the late 60s. It had survived the poverty that tried to swallow my grandparents whole. It had survived the death of my grandfather, its keys absorbing the tears my grandmother shed when she played his favorite ballads alone in the dark. It was the historian of our bloodline. Every scratch on its surface was a chapter. Every yellowed key was a verse. It represented the struggle of Black artists in a world that wanted their talent, but not their humanity. And my father, the man who benefited from every sacrifice Rose made, had traded it for a car. He traded a piece of Black history for a German SUV because he wanted to look rich in front of his golf buddies. The ignorance was almost more painful than the malice. As I took the exit toward the hospice center, a cold resolve settled over me. They thought they had just done some spring cleaning. They had no idea they had just desecrated a shrine. I was not just going to tell my grandmother they sold her piano. I was going to tell her they sold her life. And Rose was many things, but she was not a woman who let people steal from her. Not even her own son. The memory that surfaced was razor sharp, cutting through the darkness of the highway. I was 7 years old, sitting on the plush beige carpet of the living room, picking at a loose thread on my hand-me-down jeans. It was not a birthday. It was not Christmas. It was just a Tuesday, but for Bianca, every day was a celebration. My father had walked in the front door holding a large gold-wrapped box. I remember perking up, the naive hope of a child fluttering in my chest. But he walked right past me, his eyes fixed on Bianca, who was sitting on the sofa in a dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe. "For my little princess," he said, his voice dripping with affection. Bianca tore open the box to reveal a porcelain doll. It was exquisite with curly blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing a dress that matched her own. My mother clapped her hands together, beaming. "Oh, David, it is perfect," she cooed. "It looks just like her. Look at that skin. So fair. So delicate." That was the quiet, poisonous undercurrent of our household. Colorism. It was never shouted, but it was always there, woven into the comments about staying out of the sun, the praise for Bianca's light honey-colored skin, and the silence surrounding my own deep mahogany complexion. Bianca was the high yellow trophy they could show off at the country club. I was the dark-skinned daughter who reminded them of the roots they were trying desperately to breed out. I stood up, my small voice trembling. "Daddy, did you bring me something?" My father looked down at me, his smile fading into a look of mild annoyance, as if he had forgotten I was there. "Oh, Imani. No, not today. That doll is a collector's item. It is delicate. You know how you are. You are a bit too heavy-handed. You would probably break it." He did not say too dark, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. "You do not fit the aesthetic. Why do not you go play on the piano?" my mother added, waving a hand toward the corner. "That big old thing is sturdy. It can handle you." I felt the tears hot and stinging in my eyes, the shame of being unwanted burning my cheeks. I turned to run to my room, but a hand caught my shoulder. It was warm, firm, and smelled of lavender and sheet music. Grandma rose. She did not look at my parents. She did not look at Bianca and her new doll. She looked at me. She knelt down, her knees popping until she was eye level with me. Her skin was the same shade as mine, a rich, beautiful darkness that she wore like a crown. "Let them have their dolls, Imani," she whispered, her voice low and fierce. "Dolls are hollow. They have empty heads and plastic hearts. They cannot speak. They cannot feel." She stood up and guided me to the Steinway. She sat me down on the bench and placed my small dark hands on the black and white keys. "This," she said, gesturing to the instrument. "This is not a toy. This is a beast. It is powerful. It is loud. It commands attention. And it takes a queen to tame it. They gave your sister a piece of plastic. I am giving you a voice." She pressed my finger down on middle C. The note rang out clear and resonant, filling the room and drowning out my mother's cooing over the doll. "Never let them make you feel small, because you were built to be big," Rose told me. "You are made of the same wood as this piano. You are rare. And you are going to make music that they will never be able to ignore." That was the day the piano stopped being furniture and started being my armor. And now, 20 years later, as I sped toward the hospice center, I realized that by selling it, they hadn't just taken an object. They had tried to strip me of the very thing that made me proud of who I was. They were about to learn that you can take the piano from the girl, but you cannot take the fight out of her. The road ahead of me blurred as another memory fought its way to the surface, this one jagged and raw. I was 12 years old. It was the week before my first major recital. I had been practicing for hours every day, my fingers flying over the keys, coaxing music out of that Steinway that even my parents could not ignore. For the first time, the attention was shifting. Guests were complimenting me. My father had actually stopped to listen once, and Bianca, my golden sister, could not stand it. I walked into the living room after school to find her standing by the piano. She was not playing it. She was holding a silver box cutter she had taken from my father's desk. The sound hit me before the visual did. A screeching, tearing noise that made my teeth ache. She was carving a deep, jagged line right into the high-gloss finish of the fallboard directly above the maker's golden logo. I screamed. It was a primal sound of horror. Bianca dropped the knife and stepped back, feigning innocence, but the smirk on her face was unmistakable. My parents rushed in not to comfort me, but to silence me. When I pointed at the gouge, a fresh white wound in the dark walnut, my mother sighed. "It is just a scratch, Imani," she said dismissively, waving her hand. "You probably left the knife out and she was just trying to help put it away." Stop overreacting. You care more about that wooden box than your sister's feelings. I spent that night curled up under the piano bench sobbing until my throat burned. I felt like she had cut me. But then the floorboards creaked. Grandma Rose sat down beside me. She did not have a belt or a lecture. She had a tin of walnut paste and a soft chamois cloth. "Get up," she said softly. "Crying does not fix the wood. Work does." For the next 3 hours, she taught me how to fill the scratch. We worked the paste in layer by layer, buffering it until the white gash turned into a dark, subtle scar. It was still there if you looked closely, but it was smooth to the touch. "I ruined it," I whispered, running my finger over the repair. "It is not perfect anymore." Rose took my hand and placed it flat on the lid. "Listen to me closely, child. A factory makes things perfect. Life makes things real. This piano has survived a depression, a war, and now your sister's jealousy. This scar does not lower its value. It proves it is a survivor." She looked me dead in the eye, her face illuminated by the moonlight coming through the bay window. "People are going to try to scratch you too, Amani. They will try to cut you down because they are afraid of your shine. Let them. Then you heal. You polish yourself up, and you wear those scars like medals. Because perfection is cheap. But resilience is priceless." That lesson was the foundation of my life. It was why I became a therapist. It was why I worked with broken children. And as I turned the final corner toward the hospice center, seeing the sterile white lights of the building, I knew I was going to need every ounce of that resilience tonight. My parents thought they had sold a broken old piano. They did not know they had just declared war on a survivor. I parked the car, wiped my face, and walked into the lobby. It was time to show Grandma Rose that her lessons had not been in vain. The automatic doors of the hospice center slid open with a soft hiss, welcoming me into a world of antiseptic silence. I walked down the long linoleum hallway, counting the room numbers, until I reached 304. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Outside, I had been furious. I had been a warrior ready for battle. But here, standing on the threshold of the woman who taught me everything, I just felt like a little girl who had broken something precious. I pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the medical monitors. The rhythmic beeping was the only sound, a steady mechanical metronome counting down the seconds of a life that had once been vibrant and loud. Grandma Rose lay in the bed looking smaller than I remembered. Her body, once strong enough to command a stage in front of thousands, was now frail, hidden beneath layers of white hospital blankets. I pulled the plastic chair close to the bedside and sat down. The smell of lavender lotion, the kind she had used for 50 years, fought a losing battle against the scent of bleach. I reached out and took her hand. Her skin felt like dry parchment paper, delicate and thin, but her fingers were still long and elegant. These were the hands that had shaken Aretha Franklin's hand. These were the hands that had built a legacy out of nothing. And I had let them down. The tears I had held back in the garage, the ones I had swallowed on the highway, finally broke free. I rested my forehead against the metal railing of the bed and wept. I did not cry loudly. It was a quiet, shaking grief that hurt my chest. "I am sorry, Grandma," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I tried. I tried to keep it safe. But they took it. They took the piano." I squeezed her hand, hoping for a squeeze back, but there was nothing. Just the steady beep of the monitor. "They sold it." I continued the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "David and Sheila. They sold your Steinway to buy Bianca a car. They traded your life's work for a status symbol." I came home, and the corner was empty. The floor was scratched. "It is gone, Grandma. The music is gone." I lifted my head to look at her sleeping face. She looked peaceful, unaware of the violation that had just happened in her home. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. She had entrusted me with one thing, one single task: to protect the history of our family. And I had failed because I was at work, because I was not strong enough to stop my parents' greed. I failed you, I said softly, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. You told me to be resilient. You told me to be strong like the wood. But I let them chop us down. I do not know what to do, Grandma. I do not know how to fix this. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the machine breathe for her, wishing I could trade places with the piano. At least the piano had value to them. I was just the messenger of bad news. I prepared myself to stand up, to leave her to rest, to go out and face the wreckage of my life alone. But then, the rhythm of the room changed. The beeping on the monitor sped up just slightly. A shift in the air. I looked down at her hand, the hand I was about to let go of, and I saw it. The index finger, the one that used to hit the high notes with such precision, twitched. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor did not speed up out of distress. It sped up out of fury. The hand that I thought was fading away suddenly clamped down on mine with a strength that shocked me. It was a vice-grip iron, hard and demanding. I gasped, looking up just as Grandma Rose's eyes flew open. There was no morphine haze in those eyes. There was no confusion of old age. They were clear, sharp, and burning with a terrifying intelligence. It was like watching a dormant volcano suddenly decide to erupt. The frailty I had been crying over vanished, replaced by the indomitable spirit of the woman who had once stared down segregated crowds in the 1960s and made them listen to her sing. Grandma, I stammered, reaching for the nurse call button. You need to rest. I will get the doctor. Do not you dare touch that button, she rasped. Her voice was rough, like gravel, but the command was absolute. She released my hand only to reach up and claw at the plastic oxygen mask strapped to her face. I tried to stop her, terrified she would suffocate, but she swatted my hands away with a scowl. She ripped the mask off and threw it onto the pillow as if it were an insult to her dignity. She took a deep, ragged breath of unfiltered air, her chest heaving not with effort, but with indignation. Stop that sniffling right now, she ordered, her eyes locking onto mine. Wipe your face. I did not raise you to water my bedside with tears. I raised you to handle business. I quickly wiped my cheeks, stunned into silence. I had expected her to be heartbroken. I had expected her to mourn the loss of the piano just as I had. But I had forgotten who Rose was. She was not a victim. She was a matriarch. They sold it, didn't they? She asked, her voice gaining strength with every syllable. David and that wife of his. They waited until I was hooked up to these machines, and they sold my heart for cash. Yes, I whispered, my voice trembling. They bought a car for Bianca. Rose let out a short, dry laugh. It was a dark sound. Of course they did. They are predictable. Shallow people are always predictable. That is their weakness, Imani. And that is our advantage. She pushed herself up against the pillows, ignoring the wires and tubes attached to her arms. She looked at me, and for the first time that night, I did not see a dying woman. I saw a general preparing for her final campaign. You think the music is gone because the wood is gone? She said, shaking her head. The music is in the blood, child. And in that house filled with those vultures, only you and I carry the warrior blood. David thinks he is the king of the castle because he pays the light bill. He forgot that the foundation belongs to me. She extended her hand toward the bedside table, her fingers steady and demanding. Give me my phone, Imani. But Grandma, it is late, I tried to argue. Who are you going to call? I am going to make the only call that matters, she said, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. My son thinks he sold a piano. He is about to find out he just sold his roof. Give me the phone. It is time to introduce your father to the consequences of his actions. I handed the phone to her, my hand shaking slightly. Grandma Rose took it with a grip that defied her medical chart. She did not scroll through contacts. She did not hesitate. Her thumb tapped out a number from memory, a sequence she had evidently stored for a moment exactly like this one. She put the phone to her ear, her posture shifting against the hospital pillows. She was no longer the frail patient in room 304. She was the head of the family, and she was about to issue an execution order. The room was silent enough that I could hear the ringing on the other end. Once. Twice. Then a deep baritone voice answered. Rose, is it time? It was not a question of concern. It was a question of strategy. The man on the other end was Augustus Sterling, the most feared civil rights attorney in Chicago. He was a man who billed $500 an hour just to think about a case, but for my grandmother he picked up on the second ring at 10 o'clock at night. It is time, Augustus Rose said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. The fools have finally done it. David sold the Steinway. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. They actually did it. I thought David was arrogant, Rose, but I did not think he was stupid enough to rob his own mother. He is both, Rose replied, her eyes fixed on a spot on the wall, visualizing the son she was about to destroy. He sold it to buy a car for that vanity project he calls a daughter. They think I am dying, Augustus. They think the old lioness has lost her teeth. They are celebrating right now. Then let us crash the party, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. Do you want to proceed with the standard lawsuit? No, Rose cut him off sharply. A lawsuit is too polite. A lawsuit gives them time to hide assets. I do not want their money. I want their comfort. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with determination. Sterling, I am initiating the Omega Protocol. There was a long pause on the line. I watched my grandmother's face. It was stone cold. I had never heard of an Omega Protocol. It sounded like something out of a spy movie, but the look in her eyes told me this was very real and very dangerous. Are you sure? Rose Sterling asked, his voice serious. Once we pull that trigger, there is no going back. They will be on the street. That is exactly where they belong, Rose hissed. They sold the heart, Augustus. That piano was the heart of my home. If they remove the heart, they do not deserve to live in the body. I want the chest, I want the rib cage, I want the walls and the floorboards and the roof. Take the house, Augustus. Activate the clause. Understood, Sterling said. I will have the paperwork ready by morning. I will call the sheriff. Do not call the sheriff yet, Rose commanded. Let them enjoy their new car for a few days. Let them have their big party. Let them invite the whole neighborhood. I want an audience when the gavel falls. Imani is with me. She will be my eyes and ears. I will coordinate with her, Sterling said. Rest now, Rose. You have started the fire. I will make sure it burns. She hung up the phone and let it drop onto the sheets. The effort had exhausted her, but a small, satisfied smile played on her lips. She looked at me, seeing the confusion and awe on my face. You look surprised, child, she whispered. I am, I admitted. I did not know you had a protocol. I did not know you could just take the house. Dad always said he owned it. Dad says a lot of things, Rose scoffed, closing her eyes. Your father has lived his whole life on a stage I built, spending money I earned, thinking he was the director. He forgot that he is just an actor, and his contract has just been terminated. Now go home, Imani. Go home and pretend you are defeated. Let them think they won, because when we strike they will never see it coming. The offices of Sterling and Associates were located on the 45th floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, offering a panoramic view of the city that made the people below look like ants. It was fitting, I thought, as I stepped out of the elevator. Augustus Sterling had spent his career fighting for the little people, but he did it from a fortress of unassailable power. He was a legend in the legal community, a man who had marched with Dr. King in his youth and sued Fortune 500 companies into submission in his prime. I was ushered into his corner office by a silent assistant. Sterling was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out at the gray morning sky. He turned as I entered. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed, in a charcoal three-piece suit, his silver hair close-cropped. His presence demanded respect, not because he asked for it, but because he clearly had no time for anything less. Sit down, Imani, he said, his voice deep and resonant. I sat in one of the leather wingback chairs opposite his massive desk. He did not offer me coffee or small talk. He sat down and placed a single thick leather folder on the glass surface between us. The gold lettering on the cover read, "The Rose Vance Living Trust." "Your grandmother called me last night." He began, his eyes studying my face with the intensity of a prosecutor. "She told me what happened. I wish I could say I was surprised, but in my line of work, greed is as common as gravity." He opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents that smelled of old paper and ink. "Your father believes he owns that house," Sterling said, tapping a yellowed deed. "He believes this because Rose allowed him to believe it. She let him play the role of the provider because she knew his ego was fragile. But Rose is a woman of foresight. She knew David had a hole in his soul where his integrity should be. She knew that if she ever truly gave him control, he would liquidate her legacy for a quick payday." I leaned forward, looking at the documents. "So he does not own the house. Technically, his name is on the deed," Sterling clarified. "But look closer at this clause here." He pointed to a paragraph in a document dated 30 years ago. "It is a life estate agreement with a restrictive covenant," he explained. Rose transferred the title to David purely for tax purposes, but she retained a controlling interest tied to specific assets within the property. This is what we call a constructive trust. Specifically, the ownership of the real estate is legally bound to the preservation of the home's contents. Most importantly, the Steinway Model B piano, serial number 15438. He looked up at me, a small shark-like smile playing on his lips. "In plain English, Imani, the house and the piano are legally conjoined twins. The deed states that if the piano is removed or sold without the written consent of the trust protector, which is me, the transfer of the house is voided ab initio. That means, from the beginning. By selling that piano, your father did not just sell an instrument. He triggered a fail-safe that stripped him of his ownership rights effectively, immediately." I sat back, stunned. The brilliance of it took my breath away. Rose had not just protected an object, she had turned it into the linchpin of the entire estate. "So he does not own the house anymore," I whispered. Sterling closed the folder with a satisfying thud. "As of the moment he signed that bill of sale at the pawn shop, he became a squatter. And not just a squatter. By selling an asset he did not own to defraud a buyer, he committed a felony. We have him on theft, fraud, and elder abuse." He stood up and walked over to a cabinet, pulling out a fresh document. "But we are not going to arrest him yet," Sterling said, his eyes gleaming. "Rose wants the Omega Protocol. That means we let him dig his grave a little deeper. We need to find exactly where that piano went, and we need to let him throw that party. Because when the hammer comes down, we want to make sure everyone is watching. Are you ready to play your part, Imani?" Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, the material creaking softly in the quiet office. He steeled his fingers, looking at me over the rim of his glasses with a gaze that was both terrifying and comforting. "You see, Imani? Your grandmother did not just trust me with her money. She trusted me with her vengeance. She knew this day would come. She knew that eventually your father's greed would outweigh his fear of her." He tapped the document on the desk with a manicured finger. "The Steinway is listed here as a primary asset of the trust. It has a verified appraisal value of $250,000. By selling it for $100,000 and keeping the proceeds, your parents and your brother-in-law have committed grand larceny in the first degree. They also committed fraud by forging the provenance documents to the buyer. That alone carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 to 15 years in state prison." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Prison. My sister, the golden child behind bars. My father, the community leader in a jumpsuit. It was almost too big to comprehend. "But prison is messy," Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And frankly, your father would probably enjoy the attention of a trial. He would play the victim. He would blame his senile mother. We want something more absolute. We want total annihilation of their status." He flipped the page to a section highlighted in red ink. Look at Clause 4, Section B. This is the trapdoor. The life estate granted to David Vance is conditional. It is bound by what we call a constructive trust. The deed to the house is legally tethered to the preservation of the cultural heritage assets located within the property, the primary asset being the Steinway. He looked up at me, a small shark-like smile playing on his lips. In plain English, Imani, the house, and the piano are legally conjoined twins. The deed states that if the asset is removed, sold, or damaged due to negligence or malice, the life estate is immediately terminated. It is an automatic trigger. There is no court hearing required to activate it. The moment that piano left the premises, your parents ceased to be the owners of that property. My mouth went dry. I stared at the paper, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. So who owns it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sterling pointed a finger directly at me. You do. The ownership transfers directly to the secondary beneficiary. As of yesterday afternoon, you are the legal owner of the mansion, the land, and everything inside it except for that stolen car. He stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city. But possession is 9/10 of the law. If we storm in there now with the police, they will claim it was a mistake. They will say they sent it out for repairs. They will try to wiggle out of it. We need them to confess. We need them to be so comfortable in their crime that they admit to the sale publicly. We need them to brag about it. He turned back to me, his eyes hard. That is why we wait for the party. You are going to go back there, Imani. You are going to play the role of the defeated daughter. You are going to apologize. You are going to make them feel safe, and while they are toasting to their own cleverness, we will be waiting to pull the rug out from under them. Are you ready to lie to the liars? The drive from the pristine glass-enclosed world of Sterling's law firm to the south side took 40 minutes, but it felt like traveling to a different planet. I was riding shotgun in a nondescript gray sedan driven by Cole Sterling's lead private investigator. Cole was a man of few words, built like a linebacker wearing a jacket that concealed both a firearm and a high-definition button camera pinned to his lapel. We parked across the street from a building that looked like a sore tooth in a mouthful of decay. The neon sign above the door buzzed aggressively, spelling out "Quick Cash Pawn" in flickering red letters. The windows were barred with heavy iron grates, and the sidewalk out front was stained with years of neglect. This was where my family's heritage had been dumped. This was where my father and Brad had dragged a masterpiece to die. Ready? Cole asked, his voice low and steady. Remember, let me do the talking. You are just the aggrieved relative. We need him to admit the transaction on tape. I nodded, my stomach twisting in knots. I adjusted my coat and stepped out into the humid, gritty air. We walked to the door, buzzed the intercom, and waited for the heavy magnetic lock to disengage with a loud clank. The inside of the shop smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. The shelves were cluttered with the debris of hard luck lives. Power tools, wedding rings, video game consoles, and musical instruments that looked like they had been pawned to pay for rent, or worse. Behind a thick pane of bulletproof plexiglass sat a man who looked like he belonged to the furniture. He was heavy-set, balding with grease stains on his shirt, and eyes that calculated the value of your watch before they met your face. "Can I help you?" he grunted, not looking up from a magazine. Cole stepped up to the window, his posture relaxed but commanding. He tapped the counter with a knuckle. "We are looking for information regarding a transaction that happened here yesterday morning. A large item. A Steinway grand piano." The man behind the glass paused. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "We do not give out info on customers. Store policy." Cole leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more threatening than a shout. "We are not the police, friend. We are private counsel, and we know you bought it. We just want to verify the seller." Tall guy, white, loud, probably told you he was doing you a favor. The pawnbroker let out a short, wheezing laugh. He knew exactly who we were talking about. "Oh yeah, I remember him. Guy came in here acting like he owned the city, said he had a piece of junk taking up space. That piece of junk was a 1965 Steinway Model B, I interjected, unable to help myself. The man shrugged. Look, lady, I buy what people sell. He wanted it gone fast. He said he needed cash for a car down payment. He was sweating, desperate. Cole tapped his lapel again, ensuring the camera had a clear angle. We need to know the price, Cole said. How much did you give him for it? The pawnbroker hesitated, looking between us. Why does it matter? Because he told the family he sold it for 100 grand. Cole lied smoothly. We are just checking his math. The man behind the glass burst out laughing, a deep hacking belly laugh that shook his frame. 100 grand. Is that what he told you? That con artist. He begged me to take it. I told him I do not have space for a grand piano. I told him nobody in this neighborhood buys classical instruments. I did him a favor taking it off his hands. He pulled a ledger from under the counter and slapped it open, spinning it around so we could see the entry. I gave him 40,000 cash, and honestly, I probably overpaid, but he was practically on his knees. He took the 40, signed the waiver, and ran out of here like his pants were on fire. I stared at the number in the ledger. $40,000. Brad had told my parents he sold it for 100. He had pocketed $60,000 of imaginary money, and on top of that he had only actually received 40. The level of deception was staggering. He had robbed my grandmother, defrauded my parents, and lied to everyone, all while acting like the savior of the family. Cole smiled a cold, predatory smile. Do you have the paperwork he signed? Yeah, the man said, pulling a carbon copy slip from a file. Right here. Cole zoomed the button camera in on the signature at the bottom. It was a messy scrawl. That is not the owner's signature, I whispered. That is a forgery. Cole nodded. Perfect. We have him on fraud. Now the big question. Is the piano still here? The pawnbroker shook his head. Nope. Moved it this morning. A collector from New York has been looking for a Model B for months. I called him 5 minutes after your boy left. Sold it for 280. It is already on a truck headed east. My heart sank. It was gone. Truly gone. But Cole did not look worried. He just looked at me and gave a small nod. We had the evidence. We had the confession. Now we just needed to close the trap. The pawnbroker tapped a greasy finger on the carbon copy receipt, a smirk playing on his lips, as if he were sharing a joke that only men of low morals could appreciate. He looked from the ledger to Cole and then to me, enjoying the look of horror that was slowly spreading across my face. You want to know the funny part? The man said, leaning back in his creaking chair. That guy Brad, he was sweating bullets when he came in here. He didn't just want to sell the piano. He wanted a favor. He begged me to write up a dummy receipt. Cole zoomed the hidden camera in closer. A dummy receipt. He repeated, his voice neutral. Yeah, the pawnbroker chuckled. He sold the piano to me for $40,000. Cash. That is the real price. That is what I gave him. But he made me type up a second invoice on official letterhead stating the sale price was $100,000. He told me he needed to show it to his in-laws. Said the old couple wouldn't understand the market and he needed to look like a shark. He wanted to be the hero who brought home the big kill. My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Brad had not just sold a $250,000 heirloom for pennies on the dollar. He had sold it for $40,000, a fraction of its worth, and then forged a document to make my parents think he was a financial genius. He had looked my father in the eye, handed him a fake piece of paper, and accepted their praise while pocketing the difference in reality versus perception. So the 100 grand never existed, I whispered, staring at the dirty floor tiles. Nope, the pawnbroker confirmed. He walked out of here with 40 large in a duffel bag. If he bought a fancy car, he definitely didn't pay for it with piano money. He probably put that 40 down as a deposit and financed the rest up to his eyeballs. Your boy is drowning in debt and using your family assets to act like he is swimming in cash. He is a con artist, lady, and not even a good one. Cole straightened up, signaling that we had heard enough. We had the confession. We had the proof of forgery. We had the proof of the real sale price. Brad hadn't just committed theft against the estate. He had committed fraud against my parents. He had manipulated their trust to boost his own fragile ego and hide his incompetence. We walked out of the pawn shop and into the blinding sunlight. I felt sick. My parents were throwing a party right now to celebrate a car that was likely leased or financed, with a predatory loan paid for by the destruction of my grandmother's legacy. They were toasting a liar. He didn't just steal the piano, I said to Cole as we got back into the car. He stole the truth. He made them think he saved the day while he was actually robbing them blind. Cole started the engine, his face grim. That is the best kind of evidence, Imani. Judges hate thieves, but they absolutely despise liars. Brad just handed us the nail for his own coffin. Now let's go find out where that truck took your piano. We have a shipment to intercept, $280,000. The number echoed in the quiet cabin of the sedan as Cole navigated through the heavy Chicago traffic. My father, the man who prided himself on his investment portfolio, had allowed his son-in-law to sell a family heirloom for $40,000, only for it to be flipped 24 hours later for 7 times that amount. It was not just a tragedy, it was a joke. A sick, expensive joke. My parents had traded a legacy that was appreciating in value for a depreciating SUV that would lose half its worth the moment it drove off the lot. The sheer financial incompetence was staggering. They had let a predator like Brad walk into our home, strip it of its most valuable asset, and thank him for the privilege of being robbed. Cole was already on his phone, his voice clipped and professional, as he spoke to one of his contacts in the logistics world. I need a location on a freight truck heavy haul departing South Chicago this morning. Destination New York City. Cargo is a musical instrument. Crate number 409. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. He looked over at me and gave a thumbs up. We got it, he said to the contact. Do not let it cross state lines if you can help it. If it hits Pennsylvania, the jurisdictional red tape becomes a nightmare. I want that truck pulled over. Use the theft report number I just generated. He hung up and tossed the phone onto the dashboard. Good news and bad news, Imani. The bad news is that the piano is already on Interstate 80 heading east. It is moving fast. The collector in New York paid a premium for expedited shipping. He knows exactly what he bought and he wants it in his penthouse before anyone realizes it is missing. I stared out the window watching the city blur by. And the good news? The good news is that we have the bill of lading, Cole replied, merging onto the highway. We know the trucking company, and because we have the forged bill of sale from the pawn shop, we can technically flag the cargo as stolen property. But it is going to be close. If that piano gets delivered to a private residence in Manhattan, getting it back will require a court order that could take months. We have to stop it on the road. I felt a surge of panic. Months. I could not wait months. My grandmother did not have months. You have to stop it, Cole, I said, my voice tight. That piano cannot reach New York. If it disappears into a private collection, I will never see it again. Cole nodded grimly. I am on it. Sterling is already drafting a cease and desist order for the trucking company. We are going to freeze that truck in its tracks. But right now, you need to focus on the bigger picture. We know where the piano is. We know who stole it. And we know how much they really got for it. You have enough ammunition to blow up your entire family. The question is, can you hold your fire until the party? I thought about Bianca posing with the car. I thought about my father pushing me into the dirt. I thought about Brad's arm around my shoulder lying to my face. I can hold it, I said, the anger settling into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Let them think they got away with it. Let the truck keep driving for now. I want them to feel safe. I want them to sleep soundly tonight. Because when I wake them up, I want it to be a nightmare they never recover from. Cole patched the call through to the car's Bluetooth system. Augustus Sterling's voice filled the cabin, but he was not speaking to us. He was speaking to Mr. Kensington, the private collector in New York, who currently believed he was the proud new owner of a Steinway. Mr. Kensington, let me be crystal clear. Sterling's voice was smooth but sharp as a razor. You are currently in possession of stolen property. The bill of sale you received is a forgery. The man who sold it to the pawnshop had no legal title to the instrument. That piano belongs to the Rose Vance Living Trust, and I have already filed a police report in Chicago. There was a frantic sputtering on the other end of the line. But I paid $280,000 for it. I have the paperwork. It is on a truck right now. You cannot just demand it back. I am not demanding. Mr. Kensington. Sterling interrupted, his tone dropping to a dangerous low. I am advising. If that truck crosses the state line into Pennsylvania, you are liable for trafficking stolen goods across state lines. That is a federal offense. Do you want the FBI knocking on your penthouse door this evening, or do you want to resolve this like a gentleman? Silence hung heavy in the car. I watched the digital timer on the dashboard count the seconds. Kensington was a businessman. He was weighing the loss of a piano against the loss of his reputation. Fine, Kensington snapped. Turn the truck around. But I want my money back. Every cent. And I want it now. I am not waiting for insurance claims or court settlements. You wire me the $280,000 within the hour, or I let that truck keep driving. I looked at Cole, panic rising in my throat. My parents didn't have that kind of money. Brad certainly didn't. The money was gone. Done, Sterling said instantly without a hint of hesitation. I gasped. Sterling, that is $250,000. Rose prepared for this. Imani, Sterling said, addressing me for the first time. The trust has a liquid contingency fund. I am authorizing an emergency wire transfer to Mr. Kensington immediately. The piano is coming home. He turned his attention back to the collector. The funds are being wired as we speak. Instruct the driver to bring the cargo back to the depot in Chicago. And Mr. Kensington, if you ever try to buy an instrument from my client's family again without my direct approval, I will sue you until you are selling your cufflinks to pay for lunch. The line clicked dead. I slumped back in the seat, the adrenaline leaving my body and leaving me shaking. We had done it. The piano was safe. It wasn't going to New York. It was coming back to Chicago. But the reality of the situation hit me hard. My grandmother just had to spend nearly $300,000 of her hard-earned savings to buy back her own property because her son was a thief. Cole looked at me, his expression serious. We secured the asset, Imani. That was the hard part. Now comes the dangerous part. You have to go home. You have to walk into that house, look your father in the eye, and pretend you know nothing. You have to let them think they got away with it. Can you do that? I thought about the money Sterling just spent. I thought about the car in the driveway. I thought about the smirk on Brad's face. I can do it, I said, staring out at the Chicago skyline. I will be the best actress they have ever seen, because the curtain doesn't fall until the party starts. The ride back to the suburbs was a blur of concrete and fury. My hands were resting in my lap, but they felt heavy, like I was holding a loaded weapon. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to unleash hell the moment I walked through the door. I wanted to throw the pawnshop receipt in Brad's face. I wanted to tell my father that he was technically homeless. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered, but I forced myself to breathe. In and out, in and out. Sterling was right. Immediate gratification was for children and fools. It was what my family did. They wanted the car now. They wanted the money now. They wanted the status now. And that short-sighted greed was exactly why they were going to lose everything. If I exploded now, if I let my anger take the wheel, I would give them a chance to spin the narrative. Brad would lie. He would say it was a misunderstanding. My parents, desperate to believe their golden son-in-law, would back him up. They would paint me as the hysterical, jealous sister again. I would be the villain, and they would be the victims of my instability. Number one, I needed them to be comfortable. I needed them to be arrogant. I looked out the window as we turned onto our street. The houses were all perfectly manicured, the lawns green and obedient. It was a neighborhood built on appearances, and I was about to stage the greatest show it had ever seen. I had to be a Trojan horse. I had to carry the destruction inside me, hidden behind a smile, and wait until the gates were locked before I let the soldiers out. Cole pulled the car up to the curb a few houses down from my driveway so he wouldn't be seen. "You got this, Amani," he said, his voice low. "Remember, you are defeated. You are sad. You are resigned. Give them the victory today so you can take the war on Saturday." I nodded and stepped out into the cool night air. Walking up the driveway felt like walking onto a stage. The white Mercedes G-Wagon was still parked there, gleaming under the porch lights. I paused for a moment, running my hand along the cool metal of the hood. Yesterday, this car made me want to vomit. Tonight, it looked different. It looked like a trap. A beautiful, shiny steel trap that they had all walked into willingly. I reached for the front door handle. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my face was calm. I loosened my shoulders. I let my posture slump just a little. I prepared my voice to sound tired and broken. I was about to walk into a den of lions, but they didn't know that I was the one with the keys to the cage. I turned the knob and pushed the door open, stepping into the warmth of the house that was no longer theirs. I tied the apron strings tight around my waist. It felt like putting on armor, but instead of steel, I was arming myself with the smell of garlic and rosemary. I went straight to the kitchen and started chopping vegetables. I needed something to do with my hands, something to channel the violent energy vibrating under my skin. If I stood still, I would shake. So I cooked. I made their favorite meal: roast chicken with glazed carrots and mashed potatoes, the kind of comfort food my mother always demanded, but never cooked herself. By the time the chicken was golden brown, the scent had lured them out of the living room. My mother was the first to appear, eyeing the spread with suspicion. My father followed, loosening his tie, while Bianca and Brad trailed behind, still scrolling on their phones. "What is this?" my mother asked, picking up a carrot with her fingers. "I thought you were sulking in your room." I took a deep breath. This was the performance of a lifetime. I turned to face them, keeping my hands clasped in front of me to hide the tremors. I admitted, keeping my voice low and steady. But I did a lot of thinking on the drive. And I realized that I was wrong. The room went dead silent. My father raised an eyebrow. Wrong about what he asked. About everything I lied smoothly. "You were right. The piano was just taking up space. It was old. And Bianca, she does need that car. She is the face of this family. She is the one out there making things happen." I was being selfish, holding on to a piece of furniture just because Grandma liked it. I should be happy that we could turn it into something useful for everyone. I looked at Bianca and forced a smile. It felt like stretching rubber, but she bought it. She preened, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Well, at least you finally admit it," Bianca said. "I mean, honestly, Amani, I was embarrassed for you earlier. Rolling around in the grass like a toddler. It was not a good look." "I know," I said, bowing my head slightly. "I am sorry. I just want us to have a good party on Saturday. I want to help." My father let out a long, satisfied sigh. He walked over and patted me on the shoulder, heavy and patronizing. "Now that is the Amani I raised. It takes a big person to admit when they are being irrational. I'm glad you finally see the big picture. We did this for the family. And hey, since we got such a good price for the wood, your mother and I were talking, if you behave yourself this weekend, maybe we will cut you a check for $1,000 or so. You can buy yourself a new keyboard, or pay off some of those student loans." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. $1,000? They were offering me a crumb from a cake that did not even exist. They thought they had $60,000 in surplus cash, unaware that Brad had stolen it all. "That would be very generous of you, Dad," I said. "Thank you." My mother sat down at the table, picking up her fork. "Well, do not just stand there. Serve the food before it gets cold. And Imani, make sure you iron your sister's dress for the party. We want everything perfect." I picked up the carving knife. The blade glinted under the kitchen lights. "Of course, Mother," I said, slicing into the meat. "Everything will be absolutely perfect." The dinner plates were cleared, but the self-congratulation was just getting started. Brad had moved from champagne to my father's expensive vintage cognac, pouring himself generous glasses with the entitlement of a man who believed he owned the place. The alcohol had loosened his tie and his tongue. While my parents and Bianca were outside admiring the car under the moonlight again, Brad followed me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping with the dishes. He did not help. He leaned against the granite island, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, watching me scrub a roasting pan. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy and heavy with arrogance. "You know, Imani," he slurred slightly, pointing a finger at me. "You are a good girl. You know your place. I respect that. Not like earlier. That was messy. But you came around." I kept my back to him, my hands deep in the soapy water. I slipped my wet hand into my apron pocket and tapped the screen of my phone. The voice memo app had been running for 3 hours, but I wanted to make sure it caught every syllable of what was coming next. "I am just trying to do what is best for the family, Brad," I said softly, playing the role of the submissive sister. "I know I do not have your head for business." Brad let out a bark of laughter. He took a swig of cognac and slammed the glass down on the counter. "Business," he scoffed. "It is not about business, Imani. It is about psychology. It is about knowing what people want to hear. Take your dad, for example. David likes to think he is this big-shot investor. He walks around puffing his chest out. But between you and me, the guy is a dinosaur. He is so easy to manipulate it is almost boring." I froze, turning the water off so the microphone would catch him clearly. "What do you mean?" I asked, turning to face him with wide, innocent eyes. Brad smirked, leaning in closer, his breath smelling of alcohol and deceit. "I mean, I played him like a fiddle. He thinks I spent weeks negotiating the sale of that piano. He thinks I battled with collectors to get that $100,000 price tag." He laughed again, shaking his head at their stupidity. "I walked into a pawn shop, Imani. A dirty hole-in-the-wall pawn shop. I dumped that wood for whatever cash they had in the register. But I came back here with a fake receipt and a good story, and your dad ate it up." He patted me on the back. He called me a genius. He has no idea I pocketed the difference to pay off my gambling debts. He thinks I am the golden boy. He poked me in the shoulder hard. "That is the secret, Imani. People believe the lie they want to believe. Your parents want to believe they are rich and successful, so I gave them a shiny car and a fake number on a piece of paper. And they love me for it. They are sheep, and I am the shepherd." My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a dark, thrilling satisfaction. He had just confessed to everything. He admitted to the fraud, the theft, and the manipulation. He had called my father a sheep and a dinosaur. He had admitted to using the money for gambling. "You are very smart, Brad," I said, forcing a smile that did not reach my eyes. "You really have them figured out." "Damn right I do," he said, draining his glass. "Now be a sweetie and get me a refill. I have to go out there and listen to your mother talk about her garden club. It is exhausting being the only brain in the room." He turned and stumbled back toward the patio door. I watched him go, my hand clutching the phone in my pocket. He thought he was the shepherd. He had no idea he was the pig walking cheerfully toward the slaughterhouse. I saved the recording, backed it up to the cloud, and sent a copy to Sterling. The trap was not just set, it was lethal. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in deception. I became the perfect daughter. I was everywhere at once, anticipating needs before they were spoken, smoothing over conflicts, and feeding the colossal egos of my family members until they were bloated with confidence. I was not just planning a party, I was orchestrating a public execution, and I needed to make sure the audience was at maximum capacity. I stood in Bianca's bedroom, the air thick with the smell of hairspray and expensive perfume. She was standing in front of the full-length mirror, frowning at her reflection in a gold-sequined dress, that cost more than my monthly rent. It is too tight around the hips, Bianca complained, pulling at the fabric, and I feel like the color washes me out. I stepped forward, smoothing the sequins down her back with steady hands. It is not too tight, Bianca. I lied, my voice soft and reassuring. It fits you like a glove, and the gold matches the emblem on the car. You look like a trophy. When people see you standing next to that Mercedes, they are going to see a queen. She stopped fidgeting and looked at herself again. The vanity in her eyes was like a drug addict getting a fix. She smiled, turning side to side. You are right, she said, admiring her own reflection. I do look like a queen. Okay, we will keep this one, but make sure you get my shoes from the cobbler. I do not want to be scrambling on Saturday morning. I promised her I would handle it. I left her preening in the mirror and went downstairs to find my mother. Sheila was sitting at the dining room table, surrounded by stacks of invitations. She was agonizing over who to cut from the list to save money on catering. We should cut the Johnsons, my mother muttered, crossing out a name. And maybe the pastor. He always eats too much and he will just preach about modesty. I do not want him dampening the mood. I pulled out a chair and sat down opposite her. Mom, are you sure? I asked, feigning concern. I mean, the whole point of this party is to show everyone how well Dad is doing right. If you do not invite Pastor Jenkins, people might think you are ashamed. Or worse, that you cannot afford to feed him. My mother stopped writing. Her fear of being perceived as poor was stronger than her dislike of the pastor. And think about it, I continued, pushing the knife in deeper. If Pastor Jenkins sees the car and sees how successful Bianca is, he will have to announce it to the whole congregation on Sunday. It is free publicity for the family status. She tapped her pen against her chin, considering it. You make a good point. We need the church on our side. Fine. He stays. And what about Mr. Henderson? I suggested, pointing to another name she had crossed out. I know he and Dad are rivals, but if he comes here and sees the G-Wagon, he will know Dad won. Do not you want to rub it in his face? My mother's eyes lit up with malicious delight. She smiled a cruel, satisfied smile. Oh, absolutely. Put him back on the list. In fact, invite his wife, too. She is always bragging about her husband's Audi. I want her to choke on her envy when she sees what we bought. I spent the next hour convincing her to invite every person who held sway in our community. I added the bank manager. I added the neighbors who ran the homeowner association. I added my father's business partners. By the time we were finished, the guest list had grown from 50 people to over 100. My mother was worried about the cost, but I assured her that Dad's new success could handle it. I was not building a guest list. I was building a jury. When the police arrived, when the truth came out, I wanted witnesses. I wanted to make sure that when their reputation shattered, the sound would be loud enough to be heard all the way to the next county. I looked at the stack of envelopes ready to be mailed. Every single one of them was a ticket to their destruction. And I was going to hand-deliver them myself. Friday morning arrived with a stroke of luck that I had carefully engineered. I had suggested to my mother 2 days prior that she and Bianca looked stressed. I told them that a day at the Platinum Sands Spa was exactly what they needed to look radiant for the party. My father, not wanting to be left out of being pampered, decided to join them for a deep tissue massage. They left at 9 in the morning, leaving me behind to supposedly supervise the caterers and clean the house. As soon as the white G-Wagon disappeared around the corner, I unlocked the front door for a different kind of service team. A nondescript white van pulled into the driveway. It had no logos, no phone numbers, just a clean professional exterior. 2 men stepped out wearing generic gray coveralls. One of them was Cole. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He carried a heavy tool bag into the foyer and immediately began scanning the room for optimal vantage points. We need 3 angles, Cole said, pointing to the corners of the ceiling. 1 wide shot of the living room to catch the family interactions. 1 directed at the patio doors to cover the backyard where the car is parked. And 1 hidden microphone near the main seating area to pick up audio clearly. I watched as they worked. They were fast and precise, moving with the efficiency of a special ops team. They did not drill unnecessary holes or leave drywall dust. They replaced a smoke detector with a unit that housed a high-definition lens. They swapped out a motion sensor in the corner for one that streamed 4K video. In the backyard, they hid a camera inside the birdhouse my grandmother had hung years ago, angling it perfectly to capture the driveway and the patio. Within 40 minutes, the house was wired. Cole pulled out a tablet and handed it to me. "Check the feed," he said. "Feed." I looked at the screen. The image was crystal clear. I could see every inch of the living room. I could see the dust motes dancing in the light. I could see the empty space where the piano used to be. "This feeds directly to a secure server at Sterling's office," Cole explained. "We will be watching in real time. The moment the party starts, we are recording. Every lie they tell, every toast they make to their own greed, it is all going into the evidence file." "Is it undetectable?" I asked, handing the tablet back. "Completely," Cole assured me. "Unless your brother-in-law happens to be a counter-surveillance expert, which I highly doubt, given he sold a Steinway to a pawn shop, they will never know. You are safe, Imani. Just play your part." They packed up and left 10 minutes before my family returned. When my parents walked through the door, smelling of eucalyptus and expensive oils, they found me sweeping the floor, looking like the dutiful daughter. "The house looks decent," my mother noted, running a finger along the mantel. "Did the caterers confirm for tomorrow?" "Yes, Mother," I said, leaning on the broom. "Everything is ready." I looked up at the smoke detector above her head. The tiny red light blinked once, imperceptible to them, but to me it was a wink. They were walking into a cage, and I had just locked the door. "Go get changed, Imani," my father said, heading toward the liquor cabinet. "We have a big day tomorrow. I want everyone rested." I watched him pour a drink, unaware that Sterling was likely watching him take that sip from an office in downtown Chicago. "I will, Dad," I said, turning to go upstairs. "I will be ready." And I meant it. I had never been more ready for anything in my life. The sun broke through the curtains at exactly 6 in the morning. I did not need an alarm. I had been awake for hours, lying in the stillness, running the script through my mind one last time. Today was the day. The day the lies would stop. The day the debt would be collected. I threw off the covers and walked to the closet. My mother had laid out a floral sundress for me the night before, something pastel and passive, something that would blend into the background. I took the hanger and dropped it onto the floor. Today I was not blending in. I reached into the back of the wardrobe and pulled out the garment bag I had bought 3 days ago. I unzipped it to reveal a tailored pantsuit. It was stark, blinding white. In some cultures, white is the color of purity. In others, it is the color of death. For me, it was both. It was the death of the daughter they thought they could walk all over, and the birth of the woman who would burn their house of cards to the ground. I dressed slowly. The fabric was cool against my skin. I buttoned the jacket, the sharp lapels framing my face. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. No loose strands, no softness. I applied my makeup with precision. Sharp eyeliner, a deep matte red lipstick. When I stepped back, I did not look like a therapist who worked with sick children. I looked like a CEO executing a hostile takeover. I walked downstairs. The house was already buzzing with frantic energy. My mother was shouting at the florist on the phone about the shade of the hydrangeas. My father was outside yelling at the landscapers to blow a single leaf off the driveway. Bianca was sitting at the kitchen island holding a spoon of yogurt like it was too heavy to lift. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening. "Whoa," Bianca said, looking me up and down. "You look intense. I thought Mom wanted you in the pink dress." I poured myself a cup of black coffee. "The pink dress had an accident," I lied calmly. "I thought this was more appropriate. It is a big day for business, isn't it?" My father walked in, wiping sweat from his forehead. He stopped when he saw me. He blinked, surprised by the transformation, but he nodded approvingly. "Sharp," he grunted. "You look like you are going to court, not a barbecue. But I like it. Shows you are taking the family image seriously." "You have no idea." "Dad," I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. I am taking it very seriously. The doorbell rang. The caterers had arrived. The chaos exploded again. My mother rushed past me, thrusting a clipboard into my hands. Imani, handle the ice delivery. Make sure they go around the back. Do not let them scratch the Mercedes. I took the clipboard. I watched them scramble. They were so focused on the party, on the balloons, on the hors d'oeuvres, they did not see the guillotine hanging above their heads. I walked to the hallway mirror one last time. I adjusted my collar. I looked into my own eyes and saw Grandma Rose staring back at me. I tapped my earpiece, ensuring the line to Sterling was open. Showtime. By 2 o'clock, the backyard had been transformed into a showroom for vanity. The afternoon sun beat down on the freshly manicured lawn, reflecting blindingly off the polished chrome of the white Mercedes G-Wagon. My mother had actually rented red velvet stanchions to place around the vehicle, treating it not like a car, but like a holy relic on display. The air was thick with the scent of charcoal smoke, expensive perfume, and envy. The guests had arrived in droves, just as I predicted. Pastor Jenkins was there, balancing a plate of ribs while eyeing the leather interior of the SUV. Mr. Henderson, my father's business rival, was walking around the car with a tight, forced smile, clearly doing the mental math on the monthly payments. The neighbors were whispering behind their champagne flutes, their eyes darting between the car and Bianca, who was holding court in her gold dress like a celebrity at a film premiere. I stood near the catering tent, a silent observer in my white suit. To them, I was just the helpful daughter, ensuring the ice buckets were full. To the camera lens hidden in the birdhouse above us, I was the witness. My father tapped a spoon against his glass, the sharp sound cutting through the chatter. He stepped up onto the small raised deck, holding a microphone he had insisted on using. He loved the sound of his own voice, and today he had an audience. Friends, family, neighbors, he boomed, his chest puffed out. Thank you all for coming. Today is a special day. It is a day of celebration. He gestured grandly toward the car. We live in a world where image is everything, and my daughter Bianca has worked tirelessly to build her career. But sometimes talent needs a vehicle. Literally. We knew she needed something that matched her ambition, something that said, "I have arrived." The crowd murmured their approval. My mother dabbed a fake tear from her eye. But blessings do not come free. My father continued, his voice dropping to a somber, pious tone. We had to make sacrifices. We had to let go of the past to embrace the future. We had an old piano in the house, a heavy thing, a relic. It was gathering dust, and frankly, it was holding us back. He paused for effect, looking around the yard. But God is good. He sent us a visionary. My son-in-law, Brad. Brad stepped forward, beaming, raising his glass to the applause. This young man saw value where we saw a burden. David said, clapping a hand on Brad's shoulder. He worked the phones. He hustled. He found a buyer who understood the market, and he turned that old wood into the magnificent machine you see before you today. He didn't just sell a piano. He invested in this family's future. I watched Pastor Jenkins nod in agreement, shouting an amen from the back. The hypocrisy was suffocating. They were praising a theft. They were thanking God for a fraud. So let us raise a glass, my father concluded, lifting his champagne high. To Bianca, to Brad, and to the Vance family. May we always recognize that sometimes you have to clear out the old clutter to make room for new blessings. Cheers! Cheers! The crowd roared back. I did not raise a glass. I tapped my earpiece. The speech was recorded. The confession was public. They had just toasted to their own demise. I looked toward the side gate. It was time. The applause was still echoing off the siding of the house when the sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel silenced the backyard. It was not the polite arrival of a late guest. It was an invasion. The heavy iron gates at the side of the property, which my father usually kept locked to keep out the riffraff, swung open with a mechanical groan. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, confusion rippling through the guests. First came the police cruisers, 2 of them. They did not use sirens, but the sudden flash of blue and red lights washed over the pristine white Mercedes, turning the family trophy into a crime scene. Behind the squad cars, rolled a long obsidian black limousine. It moved like a hearse, silent and terrifyingly expensive. The DJ cut the music instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the idling engines and the nervous murmurs of the neighbors. My father stood on the deck, his champagne glass still half raised, his face twisting from pride to indignation. He stepped down, his face flushing red. "What is the meaning of this?" he shouted, marching toward the driveway. "Who called the police? We have a permit for this gathering." He was met not by an apology, but by the synchronized slamming of car doors. 4 uniformed officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts. They did not look at him. They looked at the house. They looked at the car. They stood in a formation that suggested they were not here for a noise complaint. Then the rear door of the limousine opened. A driver in a black cap held it steady as Augustus Sterling emerged. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Everyone in Chicago knew Augustus Sterling. Seeing him in a courtroom was intimidating. Seeing him step onto your lawn on a Saturday afternoon was a death sentence. He buttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate movement. He held a thick stack of legal documents in one hand, wielding them like a weapon. "Sterling," my father stammered, his bluster faltering for a second. "What are you doing here? This is a private event." "It was a private event," Mr. Vance Sterling said. His voice was not loud yet. It carried to every corner of the yard. "Now it is an eviction." "Eviction!" my mother shrieked, rushing to my father's side. She looked at the neighbors, her social standing crumbling in real time. "Do not be ridiculous. We own this house. Get off our property." Sterling ignored her. He walked past them, straight toward the white SUV. He ran a hand along the hood, right where the red ribbon still sat. "Beautiful car," Sterling noted coldly. "It is amazing what you can buy when you sell things that do not belong to you." He turned to face them, and then he looked at Brad. Brad had turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. He was trying to back away into the crowd, but 2 officers stepped into his path, blocking his escape. David Vance, Sheila Vance, and Bradley Miller Sterling announced, holding up the paperwork. "You are hereby served with an immediate cease and desist, a notice of revocation of trust, and a criminal summons for grand larceny in the 1st degree." The crowd erupted in whispers. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. "Larceny," he sputtered. "We sold our own piano. You cannot arrest us for selling our own furniture." "That is where you are confused," David Sterling said, stepping closer until he was inches from my father's face. "You did not sell a piano. You sold a cultural heritage asset belonging to the Rose Vance Living Trust. And per the deed you signed 30 years ago, the ownership of this house was conditional on that piano remaining in this living room." Sterling signaled to the police. "You broke the contract, you stole the asset, and as of this moment, you are trespassing on the property of the trust's sole beneficiary." My father looked around wildly, his eyes finally landing on me, standing by the catering tent in my white suit. "Imani," he pleaded. Tell him we are family." I stepped forward. I did not smile. I did not yell. I just looked at him with the cold detachment of a stranger. "I am sorry, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. "But the owner of this house has asked you to leave." The silence in the backyard was shattered by the harsh, rhythmic beeping of a flatbed tow truck backing into the driveway. It was a sound that signaled the end of the fantasy. The red velvet ropes were kicked aside by the police officers, treating the VIP display like a crime scene perimeter. Officer Sterling said, gesturing calmly toward the gleaming white SUV. "This vehicle is classified as the fruit of criminal activity. It was purchased with laundered funds obtained through the illegal sale of trust assets. Please secure it as evidence." Bianca let out a scream that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. She threw herself toward the car, grabbing the door handle as if her physical weight could stop the law. "You cannot take it," she shrieked, her mascara running down her face in jagged black lines. "It is mine. My name is on the title. It is my car." The lead officer stepped forward, physically blocking her from the vehicle. Actually, ma'am, the bank owns it and the down payment was stolen. That makes this vehicle a felony in motion. Step away from the car or you will be charged with obstruction of justice. Bianca stumbled back, looking at her husband for help, but Brad was currently preoccupied with his own nightmare. 2 officers had flanked him. He looked small now. The arrogance that had filled the kitchen the night before, the swagger he had displayed during the toast, it had all evaporated. He looked like exactly what he was, a con man caught in the spotlight. Bradley Miller, the officer, announced, his voice booming for the entire party to hear. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest." Brad's eyes darted around the crowd, looking for an exit, looking for a friendly face. He found neither. The guests, the same people who had cheered for him 5 minutes ago, were now holding up their phones, recording his downfall in high definition. "Wait," Brad stammered, holding his hands up. "This is a mistake. My father-in-law told me to sell it." David, tell them. Tell them it was your idea." My father stiffened. The betrayal hit him harder than the police presence. He looked at Brad, the man he had called a visionary, the man he had praised as a son. "You liar!" David roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You told me you handled it legally. You told me you got $100,000. The officer did not care about the family drama. He spun Brad around and slammed him against the side of the G-Wagon. The sound of metal cuffs ratcheting shut echoed across the lawn. Click, click, click. "You are being charged with grand larceny, forgery in the 2nd degree, and wire fraud," the officer recited, tightening the cuffs. "We have the pawn shop receipt, Mr. Miller. We have the forged bill of sale. And we have the witness testimony regarding the actual sale price of $40,000. The crowd gasped. The number hung in the air. 40,000. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She looked at the car, then at Brad. 40,000, she whispered. "You told us 100. You stole from us, too." Brad was shoved toward the squad car, his head pushed down to protect it from the doorframe, a courtesy he did not deserve. As he was dragged away, kicking and shouting about how he was just trying to help, the tow truck winch whined into action. The chains were hooked to the undercarriage of the Mercedes. Slowly, painfully, the symbol of Bianca's success was dragged up the ramp. The tires screeched against the pavement, a sound of resistance that mirrored my sister's sobbing. I stood next to Sterling, watching the spectacle. I did not feel pity. I watched as the tow truck driver secured the wheels and drove away, taking the family's pride with him. The driveway was empty now. Just a patch of oil and the crushed remains of the red ribbon. "That is one problem solved," Sterling said quietly, adjusting his cuffs. "Now let us address the eviction. Shall we go inside?" The dust from the departing tow truck had barely settled when my father turned on Sterling, his face mottled with rage and confusion. He was a man drowning, desperate to find something solid to hold on to, and his pride was the only thing left. "This is harassment," David shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the attorney. "You have humiliated my family. Brad made a legitimate sale. He brought us a cashier's check. We saw the paperwork. You are twisting the truth to help this ungrateful girl steal my house." Sterling did not shout back. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet. He walked over to the DJ booth, which had been abandoned in the chaos, and plugged a cable into the main soundboard. "I am not interested in your version of the truth," David Sterling said, his voice amplified by the massive speakers that were meant to play party music. "I am interested in the math. You claim you sold the piano for $100,000. You claim your son-in-law is a financial wizard. Let us hear what the buyer had to say." He pressed play. A burst of static crackled through the backyard, followed by the gritty, unmistakable voice of the pawnbroker. The volume was loud enough to be heard 3 houses down. "Yeah, the guy was sweating bullets. He begged me to write up a dummy receipt. He sold it to me for 40,000. Cash. That is the real price. But he made me type up a second invoice stating the price was 100 grand. Said he needed to show it to his in-laws. Said the old couple wouldn't understand the market, and he needed to look like a shark." The recording continued, the pawnbroker's laughter booming across the lawn like thunder. He pocketed the difference. Your boy is drowning in debt. He is a con artist, lady, and not even a good one. Sterling cut the audio. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. The guests stood frozen, their drinks forgotten in their hands. They looked at my father, not with envy, but with pity. The great David Vance, the shrewd investor, the head of the household, had been swindled by a man who treated him like a senile old fool. My father's face went pale, the red rage drained away, leaving him looking gray and hollow. He looked at the empty driveway where the car used to be. He did the math in his head. The car cost $100,000. Brad only got 40 for the piano. That meant the car was likely leased or bought on credit that would never be paid. The entire foundation of his pride was a lie. You let him play you, Dad, I said, stepping into his line of sight. He laughed at you. He told the pawnbroker you were easy to manipulate. And you proved him right. My mother, who had been standing beside him clutching her pearls, let out a strangled gasp. The reality of the situation finally pierced her delusion. The social standing she had cultivated for decades was incinerated in 60 seconds. Her son-in-law was a felon in handcuffs. Her husband was a laughingstock. Her daughter was a fraud. I cannot! She wheezed, her hand fluttering to her chest. I cannot breathe! Her eyes rolled back in her head and her knees buckled. It was a theatrical faint, the kind she had perfected over years of avoiding accountability, but she hit the grass with a solid thud. Mom, Bianca screamed, dropping to her knees beside her. Someone call an ambulance. Sterling watched the scene with zero emotion. He checked his watch. You can call an ambulance, he said to the crowd, but tell them to hurry, because once they take her away, the locks on the doors are being changed. The show is over, folks. It is time to go home. The chaos in the yard shifted from shock to violence in the span of a heartbeat. Bianca, who had dropped to her knees beside our mother a moment ago, suddenly scrambled back to her feet. She did not check for a pulse. She did not call for water. The realization of what Sterling had just played on the speakers had finally penetrated her self-absorbed bubble. The car was gone. The money was a lie. Her husband was not a financial genius. He was a thief who had sold her out for $40,000. She looked at Brad, who was being guided toward the squad car by the officers. The look on her face was not the concern of a wife. It was the feral rage of a narcissist whose mirror had just been shattered. You broke! She screamed, the sound tearing through her throat. You lied to me. You told me you paid cash. She kicked off her high heels and sprinted across the lawn, moving faster than I had ever seen her move in her life. The gold sequins of her dress flashed in the sun as she lunged at him. She did not care about the police. She did not care about the handcuffs. She reached him and clawed at his face with her manicured nails, leaving angry red welts across his cheek. You ruined everything! She shrieked, striking him again and again. You embarrassed me. You made me look stupid. Where is the money, Brad? Where is the rest of the money? The officers were taken off guard. They had to physically drag her off him. One officer grabbed her by the waist, lifting her off the ground as she kicked and flailed, her expensive dress tearing at the seam. Get off him, ma'am, the officer shouted. Back up, or you go in the car too. Brad, shielded behind the officer, looked at her with a mix of fear and pathetic defiance. I did it for us, Bianca, he yelled back, spitting blood from a split lip. I was trying to keep up with you. You spend money faster than I can make it. You wanted the car. You wanted the lifestyle. I had to do something. I didn't ask you to be a criminal, she spat back, struggling against the officer's grip. I asked you to be a man, and you are nothing but a cheap, lying fraud. The scene was grotesque. It was a street brawl in a country club setting. But the most damning part was not the fight itself. It was the audience, the guests, the cream of our local society. The people my mother had vetted so carefully were not looking away in polite embarrassment. They were leaning in. Every single one of them had their phone out. I saw the pastor live streaming. I saw Mr. Henderson recording with a gleeful grin. I saw the neighbors zooming in on Bianca's ruined makeup and torn dress. The illusion of the perfect Vance family was not just cracking, it was exploding, and it was being broadcast in real time to the entire internet. The influencers Bianca tried so hard to impress were now going to feast on her downfall. She wasn't an icon anymore. She was a meme. I stood perfectly still in my white suit, the only calm point in the hurricane. I watched my sister scream obscenities at her handcuffed husband, while my mother lay unattended in the grass. This was the legacy they had built. A legacy of surface-level shine covering a rotten core. And now the whole world could smell the rot. Sterling stepped up beside me, watching the police finally shove Brad into the back of the cruiser. "Well," Sterling murmured, his voice low and dry, "I believe that concludes the entertainment portion of the evening. Now comes the eviction. Are you ready to take the keys, Imani?" I looked at the house looming large and empty behind the chaos. "I am ready," I said. "Take them all down." The spectacle of the arrest was fading, but the real show was just beginning. Augustus Sterling stepped up to the microphone that my father had used only minutes ago to brag about his success. He did not tap it. He did not ask for attention. He simply waited. His silence was so heavy, so commanding, that it smothered the murmurs of the crowd and the sobbing of my sister. Even the police officers paused, sensing that the law was about to be laid down in a way that handcuffs could not achieve. Sterling opened the leather folder he had been guarding like a holy text. He pulled out a yellowed document, the paper fragile with age, but the ink legally binding. He looked at my father, who was standing by the porch railing, looking like a man whose world had tilted on its axis. David Sterling's voice boomed across the yard, clear and unforgiving. "You have spent the last 30 years strutting around this property, acting as if you were the king of the castle. You told your friends, your neighbors, and your children that this house was your achievement. You forgot one very important detail. You never owned this house." My father bristled, finding a scrap of his old arrogance. "That is a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking. "My name is on the deed. My father left it to me. He left you a life estate." Sterling corrected him, slicing through the air with the document. "Do you know what a life estate is, David? It means you are a tenant. You are a guest in your own home, allowed to live here by the grace of the true owner, the trust. But like any tenant, you had rules. You had conditions." Sterling flipped the page, the sound amplified by the speakers. "Your father, God rest his soul, knew you. He knew you were weak. He knew you coveted status over substance. So he included a restrictive covenant in his last will and testament. Clause 4, Section A." Sterling began to read, his voice taking on the rhythmic, terrifying cadence of a judge passing sentence. "The residency rights granted to David and Sheila Vance are conditional upon the strict preservation of the Vance Cultural Heritage Collection. This specifically includes the structural integrity of the home and the retention of the Steinway Model B piano serial number 15438, which is designated as the spiritual anchor of the estate." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The guests turned to look at the empty space in the living room, visible through the patio doors. Sterling lowered the paper and looked directly at my mother, who had miraculously recovered from her faint the moment the word will was mentioned. "The clause continues," Sterling said, delivering the final blow. "Any attempt to sell, damage, or remove said instrument for personal gain constitutes a breach of the covenant. Such a breach results in the automatic and immediate termination of the life estate. The property rights shall revert instantly to the secondary beneficiary." He let the words hang there, heavy and suffocating. Automatic, David. Immediate. You didn't just sell a piano to buy a car. You sold your roof. You sold your walls. You sold the ground you are standing on. When you signed that bill of sale at the pawn shop, you evicted yourself. My father staggered back as if he had been physically struck. He looked at the house, the mansion he had used to intimidate his peers, and realized it was no longer his fortress. It was a mirage. "So who owns it?" a neighbor shouted from the back, voicing the question everyone was thinking. Sterling turned and pointed a steady hand at me. I stood there in my white suit, the sun reflecting off the fabric. "Imani Vance is the sole beneficiary of the trust," Sterling announced. "This is her house, this is her yard, and you are all currently trespassing on her property." The gravity of Sterling's words settled over the backyard like a heavy blanket of snow, freezing everyone in place. The guests who had spent the afternoon drinking my father's champagne and laughing at his jokes were now looking at him as if he were a stranger. And in a way he was. The persona of David Vance, the wealthy patriarch, had evaporated, leaving behind a trembling, defeated man in a suit that suddenly looked too big for him. I did not wait for the shock to wear off. I stepped out from the shadow of the catering tent. My white suit caught the afternoon sun, making me the brightest thing in a yard filled with dark secrets. I walked toward the raised deck. I moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, the sound of my heels clicking against the stone path echoing in the silence. The crowd parted for me instinctively, stepping back to give me a wide berth. They were not just making way for the owner, they were retreating from the fire they knew was coming. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to the deck and stood face to face with my father. He was still clutching the microphone, his knuckles white, holding onto it, as if it were the scepter of a kingdom he had already lost. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to play along, to save face, to tell everyone this was just a misunderstanding. "Imani," he whispered, his voice shaking so badly the microphone picked up the tremor. "Please, do not do this. We can talk about this inside. We are family." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the fear in his eyes. And I felt absolutely nothing. The time for talking was 20 years ago. The time for family was before he pushed me into the dirt for a car. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the microphone. I did not yank it. I simply applied firm, steady pressure. He tried to hold on for a fraction of a second, a final pathetic attempt to maintain control, but his strength was gone. He let go. The speakers let out a sharp, high-pitched whine of feedback as I adjusted the grip. I turned to face the crowd. I looked at Pastor Jenkins, who suddenly found his shoes very interesting. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was already inching toward the gate. I looked at the neighbors who had sneered at my Honda Civic for years. "I am sorry for the inconvenience," I said, my voice projecting clear and cold across the lawn. "But there has been a change in management. The host of this party no longer has the authority to entertain you." My mother let out a sob from the grass, but I did not look down. "This is a private residence," I continued. "And as the new owner, I have a very strict policy against trespassing. You have 5 minutes to clear the driveway and remove your vehicles from my street. If you are still here, when the police finish their report, you will be joining my brother-in-law in the back seat of a cruiser." The effect was instantaneous. There was no polite mingling. There were no goodbyes. It was a stampede. The guests scrambled for the exit, dropping half-eaten plates of food and abandoning their drinks on the tables. Engines roared to life, tires squealed. The people who had come to worship at the altar of the Vance family's success could not run away fast enough from the stench of their failure. In less than 3 minutes, the yard was empty. The silence returned, but this time it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war is won. I clicked the microphone off and let it drop onto the wooden deck with a loud thud. I turned back to my parents. They were alone. No audience, no allies. Just me, Sterling, and the consequences of their own greed. I pointed to the back door, the same door my father had blocked the night before. "Inside," I ordered. "We have business to discuss, and take your shoes off. I do not want you tracking mud into my house." The living room was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The space where the Steinway used to sit felt like a gaping wound in the floorboards, a physical reminder of the betrayal that had taken place. My parents sat on the beige sofa, huddled together like refugees in a war zone. Bianca sat on the armrest, her mascara ruined, picking at the loose threads of her torn gold dress. Augustus Sterling stood by the fireplace, a silent sentinel, his arms crossed over his chest. I did not sit. I stood in the center of the room, directly in the empty spot where the piano bench should have been, I wanted them to look at me and see exactly what was missing. "So this is it," my father said, his voice raspy. "You are just going to throw us out, after everything we did for you. We put a roof over your head, we fed you, we clothed you." I looked at him, feeling a wave of exhaustion. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a negotiation. "You provided the bare minimum required by law, David?" I said, my voice flat. "And in exchange you treated me like a servant in my own home, you belittled my career, you mocked my appearance. And when you wanted a quick cash grab, you stole the one thing that actually mattered to me. You did not sell a piano, Dad. You sold your safety net." My mother looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "But 30 days, Imani. That is impossible. We have nowhere to go. Our friends saw everything. We cannot ask them for help. We will be laughingstocks." I shrugged. It was a cold gesture, one I had learned from her. "You should have thought about that before you invited them to watch your downfall," I replied. "You wanted an audience, Mom. Now you have one. As for where you go, I honestly do not care. You have savings. Or maybe you do not. Maybe you spent it all trying to look rich. Either way, that is not my problem anymore." Bianca jumped up, her fists clenched. "You are such a witch," she spat. "What about me? My husband is in jail. My car is gone. I have no money. You are really going to make me homeless too." I turned to my sister. The golden child. The one who had carved her name into the piano just to hurt me. "You are a grown woman, Bianca," I said, stepping closer to her. "You are in sales, right? You are a closer. Go close a deal on an apartment. Or better yet, go sell some of those designer handbags you bought with Brad's stolen money. You might be able to afford a motel room for a week." She opened her mouth to scream, but the look in my eyes stopped her. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. "This is not a debate," I announced, addressing the room. "Sterling has the eviction notice ready. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I want the house empty. And when I say empty, I mean it. You leave the furniture, you leave the appliances, you leave the fixtures. Consider it payment for the damage you did to the trust. You leave with your clothes and your personal items. That is it." "But the furniture is worth thousands," my mother wailed. "The piano was worth 280,000, I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "And you sold it for 40. Do not talk to me about value, Mother. You do not know the meaning of the word." I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the humid afternoon air flood into the air-conditioned tomb. "Sterling will handle the walkthrough on the 30th day, I said, not looking back at them. "If you are still here, the sheriff will remove you physically." I stepped out onto the porch, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. "One last thing," I called out over my shoulder. They looked up, a glimmer of hope in their eyes, thinking I might show mercy. "Don't forget to clean the carpets before you go," I said. Grandma Rose hated dirty floors. The 30-day deadline arrived not with a bang, but with the hollow scraping sound of cheap plastic wheels dragging across hardwood floors. I stood on the master bedroom balcony, the same spot where my father used to smoke his cigars and survey his kingdom. Now I was the one looking down, and the kingdom had been stripped to the bone. The house was quiet. The frantic energy of the party, the screaming matches, and the desperate phone calls to lawyers were all over. Today was just physics. Mass and gravity moving out of my space. I watched as a bright orange rental truck backed into the driveway. It was a stark, humiliating contrast to the white Mercedes that had sat there a month ago. There were no movers, no uniformed crew to wrap their belongings in bubble wrap. They could not afford the luxury of help. My father, a man who considered manual labor beneath him, was struggling with a heavy cardboard box. His suit was gone, replaced by stained sweatpants and a t-shirt that hung loosely on his frame. He looked 20 years older than he had at the party. The stress of the last month, the legal fees, the public shame, the realization that he was destitute had hollowed him out. My mother followed him, carrying 2 suitcases. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy clip. She stopped halfway down the walk, looking back at the flower beds she used to brag about. She reached out to touch a rose bush, then pulled her hand back as if she remembered she no longer had the right to touch it. She looked defeated, a woman who had played the game of appearances for decades and had finally lost to the truth. Then came Bianca. My sister looked like a ghost of her former self. The divorce papers had been filed 2 weeks ago. As soon as the reality of Brad's prison sentence and the massive debt he had accrued set in, she had cut him loose with the ruthlessness of a trapped animal gnawing off its own leg. But it didn't save her. Her credit was ruined. Her reputation was in tatters. She walked out of the front door carrying black trash bags filled with clothes. No designer luggage, no entourage. She threw the bags into the back of her friend's beat-up sedan, which was idling on the street because I hadn't given her permission to park in the driveway. She was moving into a studio apartment on the edge of town, a place with thin walls and no parking garage. It was a long way down from the penthouse dreams she had sold everyone. She paused by the car door and looked up. Her eyes found me on the balcony. There was no fire left in them, just a dull, resentful misery. She wanted to scream, "I knew." She wanted to blame me. But she was too tired. She just got into the car, slammed the door, and slumped against the window. I did not wave. I did not smile. I did not feel a surge of triumph. I felt the cold, clinical satisfaction of a surgeon who had successfully removed a tumor. The operation was messy, but the legacy would survive. My father slammed the rear door of the rental truck. He didn't look up. He couldn't bear to see me standing where he used to stand. He climbed into the driver's seat, the engine sputtered to life with a choked cough, and they began to roll away. I watched them go until the orange truck turned the corner and disappeared. The driveway was empty. The oil stain from the Mercedes was still there, a faint scar on the pavement, but the rain would wash it away eventually. I turned and walked back into the bedroom. The house echoed vast and clean. The negative energy, the judgment, the greed, it had all been packed into that truck and driven away. I walked downstairs to the living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the empty space on the floor. It was time. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had saved for this exact moment. "Hello, Sterling," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. "They are gone. Tell the movers to bring the piano home." The arrival of the truck was nothing like the chaotic departure of the rental van. This vehicle was sleek black and silent, gliding up the driveway with the dignity of a state motorcade. There were no shouting men in stained t-shirts. These movers wore uniforms that were pressed and clean. They wore white gloves. They treated the cargo not as furniture, but as a dignitary returning from exile. I stood in the open doorway watching the process with a lump in my throat. They lowered the ramp with a hydraulic hiss. The Steinway was swaddled in thick, quilted moving pads, strapped securely to a custom dolly. It looked like a sleeping giant, dormant but alive. The men moved with a synchronized, practiced rhythm. There were no sudden jerks, no scraped walls. They navigated the front steps with a reverence that bordered on the religious. As they rolled the instrument into the foyer, the house seemed to hold its breath. The emptiness that had defined the living room for the last month suddenly felt like a space waiting to be filled. They guided the piano to its original spot, the place where the floorboards were slightly lighter from decades of shielding the sun. Gentle, the lead mover whispered, "Set her down." They engaged the mechanism, and the great weight of the instrument settled onto the floor. It was a heavy, resonant thud that vibrated through the soles of my feet. It felt like a heartbeat restarting. One by one, they unstrapped the buckles. They peeled back the protective layers. The sunlight streaming through the bay window caught the first glimpse of the lacquer. It was not just black. It was a deep liquid obsidian that seemed to drink the light and reflect the world back with more clarity. The curve of the lid, the gold lettering of the brand, the sturdy elegance of the legs. It was all exactly as I remembered, yet somehow more beautiful because it had been lost. The foreman bowed his head slightly. "Would you like to inspect it, Miss Vance?" I walked forward. My hand trembled as I reached out. I ran my fingers along the rim. It was cool to the touch, smooth as glass. I traced the scratch near the back leg, The one I had made with a toy car when I was 5, it was still there. It was still a scar of history, a proof of life. I sat down on the bench. It creaked familiarly. I reached out and lifted the fallboard. The keys were waiting for me. 52 white, 36 black. They were perfect. They were a smile that had been hidden in the dark for too long. I placed my fingers on the keys. I did not play a song. I just played a single C major chord. The sound filled the room. It was rich, warm, and impossibly loud in the empty house. It bounced off the walls, chasing away the shadows of my father's shouting and my sister's greed. The note hung in the air, shimmering like gold dust. The house was no longer a hollow shell. The air felt different. It felt heavy with memory and light with promise. The intruders were gone. The noise was gone. The soul of the estate had returned, and for the first time in my life, the silence that followed the music did not feel lonely. It felt like peace. The call from Sterling came at dawn 3 days after the piano returned home. His voice was soft, lacking its usual legal sharpness. He did not need to say the words. I knew. Grandma Rose had held on just long enough. She had waited until the ink was dry on the eviction, until the thieves were gone, and until her beloved instrument was back where it belonged. She died as she lived on her own terms, satisfied that justice had been served. We did not hold the service at a funeral home. That felt too cold, too impersonal for a woman who contained so much fire. We held it in the living room. The afternoon light filtered through the sheer curtains, bathing the space in a warm, golden haze. There were no banks of showy lilies or pretentious arrangements meant to impress neighbors. There were just vases of wild yellow roses, her favorite, placed on every surface. The room smelled of fresh flowers and old sheet music. The guest list was short. It was a stark contrast to the bloated, superficial crowd my parents had invited to their car reveal. There were no politicians seeking votes, no social climbers, no business rivals. The room was filled with the people who had actually known Rose Vance. There was Mr. Abernathy, the old jazz drummer who used to play with her in the 60s, his hands shaking but his eyes clear. There was Mrs. Higgins, who had baked bread for her every Sunday for 20 years. There was Sterling standing in the back not as a lawyer but as a grieving friend. And there were the empty spaces. My father was not there. My mother was not there. Bianca was not there. They had sent a wreath, a massive gaudy thing with a ribbon that read "Beloved Mother." I had instructed the security guard at the gate to send it back. They had forfeited their right to mourn her when they tried to sell her legacy for scrap. Their absence was not a tragedy, it was a relief. The air in the room was pure, unpolluted by their greed. When the eulogies were done, the room fell silent. Everyone looked toward the corner, toward the Steinway. It sat there, the lid raised, like a black sailboat ready to catch the wind. I walked over and sat on the bench. I smoothed my black dress and rested my hands on the keys. I did not play a hymn. Grandma hated dirges. She used to say that death was just the final bar of the song and it should resolve into something beautiful. I closed my eyes and let my fingers find the rhythm she had taught me. I played a slow, smoky jazz ballad. It was a melody woven with sorrow, but underneath there was a swing, a pulse of life that refused to be extinguished. The bass notes rolled like thunder, deep and resonant, shaking the floorboards. The high notes danced light and improvisational, mimicking her laughter. I felt her in the room. I felt her hand on my shoulder, correcting my posture. I felt her nodding in time with the syncopation. For 5 minutes, I was not just playing a piano. I was having a final conversation. I poured every ounce of my love, my gratitude, and my grief into the ivory and ebony. When I hit the final chord, a complex, shimmering major seventh that hung in the air like suspended dust, I let it fade into absolute silence. I did not lift my hands immediately. I sat there listening to the house breathe. There was no applause, just a collective exhale of love. I looked up at Sterling. He gave me a small, sad smile and nodded. She was gone. But the music remained, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt complete. The house is finally quiet. It is not the eerie, tension-filled silence that used to suffocate these hallways when my father was home waiting to explode over a misplaced coaster. Nor is it the superficial buzzing silence of my mother and sister scrolling through their phones, ignoring each other in the same room. This is a different kind of silence. It is heavy. It is solid. It is the sound of ownership. I sit on the leather bench, my back straight, my posture mirroring the portrait of Grandma Rose that now hangs back in its rightful place above the mantel. The late afternoon sun cuts through the sheer curtains, creating long golden bars across the floor. They look like the lines of a music staff waiting for notes to be written. The camera of my mind pans around the room. It takes in the empty walls where my mother's gaudy, overpriced art used to hang. It sweeps over the bare corners where my father's pretentious sculptures used to stand. The clutter of their ego has been stripped away, leaving only the bones of the house. And the bones are good. They are strong. They survived the infestation of greed, and now they belong to me. I look down at my hands. These are the hands that cooked their meals. These are the hands that ironed their clothes. These are the hands they thought were only good for serving them. They never looked closely enough to see the strength in my fingers. They never noticed the calluses from hours of practice. They saw a servant. They never saw the maestro. Somewhere across town, in a cramped apartment that smells of stale smoke and regret, Bianca is likely screaming at a wall. My father is probably staring at his reflection in a cracked mirror, wondering how a man who thought he was a king ended up a pauper. My mother is likely weeping not for the loss of her home, but for the loss of her audience. They are living in the wreckage of their own choices. They bet everything on the appearance of wealth, and they lost the reality of it. I run a fingertip over the keys. They are cool, responsive, and infinitely patient. They waited for me, just like I waited for this moment. They thought the piano was just wood and wire. They thought it was an asset to be liquidated for a down payment on a status symbol. They didn't understand that this instrument was the heart of the family. When they cut it out, they killed themselves. They didn't realize that you cannot build a future by burning your history. The camera circles me now, moving faster, capturing the solitude and the power of the moment. I am the only thing left in the frame, the survivor, the heir, the victor. They sold the past to buy face. I say to the empty room, my voice steady and resonant. They traded a legacy for a lease. They wanted the world to look at them with envy, and in the end, the world looked at them with pity. I pause, letting the truth settle in the air like dust. But me, I used the truth to buy back the future. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fake it. I just needed to wait. I let them dig their own graves with their lies, and then I simply closed the lid. I position my hands over the keys, expanding my fingers to span a complex, dissonant chord that demands resolution. I look directly into the lens, breaking the fourth wall, staring down anyone who has ever been told they are too small, too quiet, or too weak. Don't ever underestimate the power of a single note played with absolute conviction. And never ever underestimate a woman who has been backed into a corner. I press down with all my weight. The chord strikes a massive, thunderous C minor that shakes the windows and reverberates through the floorboards, filling the house with a sound that is both a judgment and a liberation. The sound holds powerful and unyielding. The most profound lesson here is that integrity always outlasts superficiality. Imani's family built their empire on the fragile foundation of appearances and greed, foolishly trading a priceless legacy for a depreciating status symbol. They underestimated the power of patience and legal precision. Imani teaches us that you do not need to be the loudest person in the room to win. You simply need to be the smartest. When you weaponize the truth against liars, their house of cards is destined to collapse. Did Imani go too far, or was it perfect justice? Subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below.